Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly controversial topic: why the RDA for protein might actually be making you age faster. I know, it sounds crazy, but are the government's baseline dietary guidelines literally accelerating your biological decline? Well, if you want to optimize your health and build a resilient body for decades to come, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it. So, is the government's protein recommendation actually making you age faster? We really need to dive into this provocative question, because the answer, it might completely change how you view your next meal. For decades, we've been told to hit a specific daily protein target to stay healthy. But what if that target is fundamentally flawed? What if following the standard advice is quietly setting you up for frailty? Right now, the U.S. recommended dietary allowance, the RDA, for protein is set at a mere 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. To put that into perspective, that's just under 0.4 grams per pound. For the average adult, that looks like a surprisingly small amount of food on the plate. And according to many top longevity experts and nutrition scientists, this baseline number is not just inadequate, it might actually be a massive liability for your long-term health span. Section 1. The dangerous protein myth. Where the guidelines went wrong. Now, to understand why this baseline number might be setting you up for frailty, we first need to look at how it was calculated in the first place. Get this, the origins of this zero point 0.8 baseline actually trace all the way back to the 19th and 20th centuries. Because protein is the only macronutrient containing nitrogen, early researchers simply tried to establish the minimum intake needed to match nitrogen output in urine and sweat. Basically, if your inputs matched your outputs, you were in what they called nitrogen equilibrium, and that was it. Published in 1989, the 10th edition of the RDA was literally designed to calculate the bare minimum intake required to support basic survival and prevent your body from breaking down its own tissue. But here's the huge problem. These early studies were deeply flawed. Researchers mostly tested inactive, healthy, young college guys weighing around 150 pounds. Plus, they based their math entirely on highly bioavailable animal proteins, completely ignoring how the lower absorption rates of plant-based proteins alter our real-world needs. More importantly, they completely failed to account for anabolic resistance. That's a natural process where aging muscles require significantly more protein just to trigger growth. In short, this metric was designed for the basic survival of a young, sedentary 20-year-old, definitely not for a diverse population trying to actually thrive as they age. Section 2. Muscle, your longevity organ. Why adequate isn't optimal. The absolute crucial point here is that merely adequate for survival is a terrible benchmark if your goal is long-term health. Think about it. We don't encourage kids to settle for a D+ in school just because it's technically a passing grade, right? So why on earth do we do it with our nutrition? If you truly want to live longer and better, avoiding a condition called sarcopenia is absolutely paramount. Sarcopenia is the age-related loss of skeletal muscle mass, strength, and function. Dr. Peter Attia and other top longevity researchers stress that skeletal muscle isn't just about looking fit at the beach. It is literally your primary organ for glucose homeostasis. It acts like a sponge, absorbing glucose from your blood, shielding you from metabolic dysfunctions that lead to cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, and type 2 diabetes. So losing muscle? That's a direct, fast-track path to frailty and metabolic decline. And to truly stimulate muscle protein synthesis and prevent this muscle loss, countless randomized trials converge on a target of roughly double the RDA. You really want to aim for 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Moving from that bare minimum up to this optimal base provides the actual raw materials your body needs to not just survive, but to build and maintain the armor of muscle you're going to need as you age. Which brings us to Section 3. The aging paradox, mTOR, the dark side of high protein. Now here is where things get incredibly fascinating. If building muscle is so universally good for us, why do some top scientists claim that excess protein actually causes aging? Well, the answer lies in a biological switch called mTOR. Think of mTOR like a master nutrient-sensing regulator of cell growth. When mTOR is turned on, your body says, hey, times are good, we've got plenty of nutrients, let's grow and reproduce cells. But when it's turned off, your body shifts gears and goes into a protective, repair, and cellular cleanup mode. According to the research of Dr. Walter Longo, who's a leading figure at the USC Longevity Institute, high levels of protein, especially animal proteins that are rich in branched-chain amino acids or BCAAs, heavily stimulate mTOR and the IGF-1 axis, which stands for insulin-like growth factor. Now, while this is great for building muscle, continuous activation of these growth pathways is a known driver of cellular aging and is even linked to an increased risk of cancer. This is exactly why interventions like caloric restriction or fasting mimicking diets, which quiet down and silence mTOR, have actually been shown to lower biological age. Because of this deep cellular tension, Dr. Longo suggests limiting BCAAs and taking a low-protein, primarily plant-based approach of around that 0.8 gram per kilogram mark for most of your adult life, just to keep those growth pathways quiet. But he even concedes that we must introduce more animal protein after the age of 65, because eventually, the very real threat of frailty and muscle loss outweighs the risks of activating mTOR. Section 4, Surviving versus Thriving, Synthesizing the Great Debate. So, we are left with this fascinating paradox, right? Eat too little protein, and you risk losing your muscle, developing metabolic dysfunction, and succumbing to frailty. But eat too much, and you might continuously activate the very biological pathways that accelerate cellular aging. It feels a bit like a catch-22. At the absolute cutting edge of longevity research, we're seeing a really clear scientific divide. On one side of the table, we have Dr. Peter Attia. He's optimizing for physical capability, muscle mass, and strict glucose control using a high animal-based target of around 2.2 grams per kilogram. But on the other side, we have Dr. Walter Longo, who's optimizing for long-term cellular protection, low IGF-1, and reduced cancer risk using lower plant-based protein targets until you hit your senior years. However, we can actually partially resolve this tension by understanding the timing of our biology. The real key difference here is transient versus chronic activation. Transient activation of mTOR, meaning short-lived spikes triggered by a high-protein meal post-exercise, is exactly what you need to build and repair muscle. It turns on, does its job, and turns off. Chronic activation, on the other hand, is constant, elevated growth signaling from eating high calories and high protein all day long without any periods of fasting or rest. And that chronic state, that is what leads to cellular senescence. Section 5, Your Optimal Protein Target, a blueprint for healthspan. Okay, let's move to the practical application and see exactly how we can get the best of both worlds on your own plate. First, let's consider the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. The official guidelines actually state that anywhere from 10 to 35% of your daily caloric intake can safely come from protein. This means there is plenty of room, a huge amount of leeway really, within established nutritional science to comfortably and safely elevate your protein intake well above that 0.8 bare minimum without entering any dangerous territory. Furthermore, it isn't just about total daily protein, it's about the specific dose per meal. Remember that anabolic resistance we talked about, that stubbornness of older muscles to grow? Well, to overcome it, the data shows your body needs a targeted dose of 2.5 to 3.0 grams of the essential amino acid leucine at a single meal. This is the precise threshold required to actually trigger muscle protein synthesis. If you're just grazing on a tiny bit of protein all day long, you literally never cross this threshold. So, to secure the lean muscle necessary for a long health span, you're looking at a simple 3-step protocol. Step 1. Aim for that 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram daily target. Step 2, prioritize high-quality, complete proteins that hit that leucine threshold so you get that healthy, transient MTR spike we just talked about. And step 3, actually scratch that, this one is basically non-negotiable. Combine this with intense progressive resistance training. The exercise acts as the directional signal telling your body exactly where to send all those nutrients. As we wrap up this explainer, you really have to ask yourself a tough question. Are your dietary habits building a resilient body, or are they quietly accelerating your decline by only aiming for the bare minimum? The science is rapidly evolving from simply preventing starvation to aggressively optimizing for longevity. It's time to rethink the RDA and build a foundation for strength that will actually last a lifetime. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this fascinating science. Keep asking those big questions and keep optimizing your health. See you next time.